My name's Jane Kilcher, and I'm working with Emily Rydell on her dredge up in Nome. I love being on the dredge, and we're getting gold. I definitely have gold fever. People probably know me best from Alaska Last Frontier.
It is full-blown spring, summer on the homestead. Eve is putting in her garden, which is a very important part of the success of our homestead. And
I grew up in Homer, Alaska. And I always grew up in fairly large houses and lived in a large house. Well, I don't think I've changed because I became a Kilcher. I'm just experiencing different things.
It began with silence so loud that fans couldn't ignore it. For years, Jane Kilcher stood by her husband, Lee Kilcher, on and off screen, portraying the rugged and resilient life of Alaska's homesteading frontier. Together, they were seen as a power couple, steadfast, enduring, real. They lived without the luxuries of modern life, navigating brutally cold winters, difficult terrain, and the countless obstacles of survival. What viewers didn't see, however, was the slow unraveling happening behind the scenes. For every moment of laughter captured on the Discovery Channel, there were quieter, heavier moments that never made it to air. And when Jane finally chose to speak not with a dramatic outburst, but with firm, heartbreaking honesty, her words confirmed the rumors fans had whispered about for years. The truth wasn't a sudden explosion of scandal, it was a slow burn. Of emotional separation, of a woman carrying the weight of a life that was supposed to be shared. Jane's confirmation wasn't about blame, it was about recognition. Recognition that something precious had been lost along the way, and that pretending otherwise only deepened the pain. And so, with careful words and a heavy heart, she gave fans a glimpse into the reality they never saw coming. Before the fame, before the cameras, before the eyes of millions tuned in to watch their lives unfold in the unforgiving wilderness of Alaska, Jane and Atz Lee were just two people trying to make something work. They had known each other as kids growing up in Homer, Alaska, crossing paths in that tight-knit frontier town, but life had sent them in separate directions. Jane had become a nurse, living a more conventional life for a while, one filled with hospitals, patients, and the kind of long days that prepared her for something even harder, homesteading. Atz Lee, meanwhile, was born into the Kilcher legacy. He was raised to hunt, fish, and build. The Kilchers weren't just a family. They were a symbol of survival, self-reliant, proud, and deeply rooted in the Alaskan wilderness. Eventually, fate brought Jane and Atz Lee back together, older, a bit more weathered by life, but somehow ready for each other this time. Their love wasn't a dramatic whirlwind. It was steady, built on shared strength and a common desire for a different kind of life. They married, merged their families, and chose the homestead together. It was a life filled with hard work and real purpose. When Discovery came calling, offering to showcase their family on television, it wasn't about chasing fame. It was about showing the world what it really took to survive without modern conveniences, to live off the grid with grit, patience, and courage. For a time, things were beautiful, at least on the surface. They built their lives together under the harsh Alaskan sky. Jane brought fire and humor to the show, balancing Atz Lee's quieter, more serious nature. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she was just herself. Tough, honest, fiercely protective, especially when it came to their children. Jane made it clear early on that her daughter Piper and Atz Lee's son Atn would not be part of the show. That decision wasn't negotiable. Jane knew too well the cost of public exposure, the cruelty of online judgment, and the vulnerability that came with letting strangers into your home. And yet, she let viewers into everything else: the freezing days of fishing, the dangerous terrain, the physical and emotional strain of frontier life. Ice fans loved her for it. They saw in her a woman who could do it all and still smile through the exhaustion. But as the seasons passed, eagle-eyed fans noticed changes, not just in what Jane and Atz Lee said, but in what they didn't say. The interactions felt colder. The moments they once shared became fewer. Jane still worked just as hard, still kept the family running, but the warmth between them was fading. The bond they once shared began to feel like something that had been quietly shelved in the background, replaced by the duties of survival and the pressures of performance. Then came the accident. The moment that would change everything. In 2015, Atz Lee fell nearly 40 feet while hiking near Otter Cove. suffering injuries that would have broken most men. Shattered arm, fractured hip, 2 punctured lungs, multiple broken ribs, and a long, uncertain road to recovery. He wasn't. Filming when it happened was a personal moment, away from the cameras, but the impact reverberated throughout the show and their lives.
Ow.
Jane became his caretaker, nurse, and emotional anchor. She updated fans, managed the homestead, looked after the kids, and kept everything running while her husband fought through pain. She never crumbled. On screen, she still cracked jokes and hauled fishing gear through ice-cold waters. Off-screen, she bore the weight of an entire life resting on her shoulders. Atz Lee survived, but something inside him had changed. Experiences do that. They carve out a quiet trauma that doesn't always announce itself with tears or words. It shows up in distance, in withdrawal, in that slow drift toward solitude. He began spending more and more time alone in the woods. Building a cabin far from the homestead said it brought him peace. Jane, loyal and loving, tried to understand. She supported his healing, respected his space, and continued showing up for their life together. But time passed, and the space between them only widened. She was still raising the kids, still managing the household, still trying to hold it, all together, but now she was doing it alone. As the seasons progressed, so did the emotional divide. Atz Lee became increasingly absent, not just physically, but emotionally. He would appear in a few scenes, help out for short stints, then disappear. Again. He wasn't malicious or cruel, just ... gone. Jane, meanwhile, stayed present. She fished, fought through winter storms, and cared for the animals and children with a tenacity that never wavered. But her spark was dimming, fans noticed. The woman who once glowed with humor and energy was now quieter, more subdued. Her posts on social media spoke only of nature, fishing, and family. The warm tributes to Atz Lee stopped. When fans asked, she answered with grace. Never bitterness, but the absence of words spoke volumes. It was clear that something deep had shifted. Their marriage had become an echo of what it once was, still standing, but hollow inside. Behind closed doors, they tried. They talked. They even went to therapy, according to some close to the family. But sometimes, love isn't enough when two people are moving in opposite directions. Atz Lee longed for solitude and healing in isolation. Jane needed partnership, connection, and shared effort. Every time he retreated deeper into the woods, she felt more abandoned, not because he was physically far, because he was emotionally gone. By the time Jane quietly confirmed the truth, that they were no longer together, fans were both heartbroken and unsurprised. It hadn't been a loud, messy breakup. There were no public fights, no accusations, no drama, just silence. The kind of silence that builds over years until it becomes louder than any words could be. Jane's statement wasn't full of anger. It was filled with quiet strength, the kind that comes from someone who has done everything possible to make it work, and finally accepts that love alone isn't always enough. She spoke about growth, about letting go, and about finding peace. After carrying years of emotional labor on her own, her decision to speak at all was not for attention, but for truth. To clear the air, to honor her journey, and perhaps give others the strength to recognize their own, fans responded with overwhelming support. Many saw in Jane a reflection of their own experiences of marriages where one partner gives until there's nothing left to give, while the other drifts away, lost in their own pain. Jane became more than a reality star in that moment. She became a symbol of resilience, of grace under pressure, and of the strength it takes to choose yourself when the relationship no longer chooses you back. In the end, Jane Kilcher didn't reveal some shocking betrayal or scandal, but she confirmed with something far more painful and real, that love can fade even when both people have the best intentions. That emotional survival is just as important as building fires and hunting game. She gave everything to her marriage, to her family, and to the life they had chosen together. And when it was no longer mutual, she quietly, powerfully stepped forward on her own. Now, she continues to live the homesteading life not because of a show or a marriage, but because it's part of who she is. Strong, capable, whole, Atz Lee too remains a part of Alaska, perhaps still searching, still healing in his own way. Their story isn't a tragedy, it's a human one. One of love found, love tested, and love released with dignity. In a world full of messy headlines and attention-seeking drama, Jane Kilcher chose grace. And sometimes, that's the loudest truth. Of all, fans had long sensed that something had changed, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on it. The vibrant connection between Jane Kilcher and Atz Lee, once so obvious, had begun to dim. In earlier seasons of Alaska, The Last Frontier, their synergy was natural, two individuals facing the harsh Alaskan wilderness together, full of grit, mutual respect, and the kind of bond forged not just in love but in survival. But with time, Jane began appearing more often on her own. Atz Lee, once a steady presence, seemed to fade into the background. His appearances became rare, and when he did show up, there was a distance in his eyes, a man physically present but emotionally absent. Their smiles, once spontaneous and warm, began to feel like a performance. The kind of smile you wear when you're trying to convince the world and maybe yourself that everything is fine. What was once a tightly woven team began to look like two people simply occupying the same space, not angry, not bitter, just disconnected. It wasn't one single argument or explosive fight that signaled the end. That would have been easier. It was a slow erosion, a gradual drifting apart. Jane kept showing up for her daughter Piper, for the work, for the legacy they were building. But behind the hard work and dedication was a woman holding up a life. By herself? Meanwhile, Atz Lee seemed to be retreating further into isolation, spending more and more time in the woods. In the cabin he was building alone, away from the homestead and the family. Piper, now growing older and more independent, needed her own space and understanding. Atz Lee's son from a previous relationship had already left for college. The once bustling homestead began to feel quieter. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes from things left unsaid, from long stretches of emotional absence. Still, Jane didn't let go not right away. She fought for what they had built, believing, hoping that maybe love could be enough. But even love, as strong as it may be, can't survive on memory and hope alone. The silence between them widened until it became undeniable. Even then, Jane didn't lash out. She didn't post dramatic messages or throw accusations across the internet. She stayed composed, speaking only when it was necessary. But in 2023, she posted something on her social media that confirmed what many had suspected. Her words were simple, but behind them was a wave of sadness and quiet acceptance. She wrote, "Here we go. Atz Lee is divorcing me, and it is very unfortunate, but I cannot control it. It's lost my best friend, and it hurts, but I guess that's life."
Oh.
There was no sensationalism, no finger-pointing, just a woman telling her truth.
Oh.
The pain in those few sentences was unmistakable. It was the sorrow of someone who had fought, waited, and believed in till she could no longer. It was private heartbreak, shared publicly, not for sympathy, but for honesty. She had carried their marriage as far as she could. And even as trolls began to surface because there are always people eager to pick apart someone else's pain, Jane stood firm. When she was targeted over a black eye that appeared on TV, and her daughter Piper was being unfairly criticized, online, she spoke up. In a Facebook post, she clarified that the injury had happened during filming, not from any domestic issue. And she added something that struck deep: "Leave my kids alone. My girl isn't and hasn't been part of reality TV. The facts aren't even straight when y'all go after her. Leave my family alone and come after me. No yelling, no anger. Just a strong mother asking for decency."
Nice.
Even at her most vulnerable, Jane maintained her dignity. She refused to let public scrutiny tear down what little piece she was holding on to. What followed was not a media storm or a tabloid frenzy. Was, instead, the quiet unraveling of something deeply personal. There were no press interviews. No tell-all exposes. Jane didn't run to magazines or create a scandal. She simply began to heal. She focused on her daughter. She reconnected with the ocean. She began slowly to rediscover the parts of herself that had gotten buried. Under years of sacrifice, at first her presence online was minimal. A few posts here and there, photos of fish, snapshots of nature, the occasional mention of her quiet days. And then, slowly, her spirit began to return. Not in a loud, flashy way, but in the kind of grounded, authentic way that only someone like Jane could pull off. Her humor resurfaced. Her grit was sharper than ever, and fans noticed. The energy she once used to hold together a failing relationship was now being poured back into herself, her work, and her daughter. Piper, though still incredibly private, grew even closer to her mother. They'd spent more time together, cooking, talking, and living simply. Their bond became unshakable. ATN remained in touch, and Jane continued to treat him as her own son. Divorce didn't change that. The family may have looked different now, but the love was still intact. Fans continued to show up in her comments, offering support, encouragement, and gratitude for her honesty. Jane responded often with a smile or a quick thank you, never letting the bitterness of her past define the woman she was becoming. She could have disappeared. She could have walked away from everything: fame, fans, social media, all of it. But she didn't. Jane Kilcher leaned into her life, not away from it. She reestablished her identity not as a reality TV wife, but as a woman who had weathered heartbreak and come out stronger. She once joked, "I don't need a man. I just need fish, peace, and a few close people who get me." And while it was funny, there was truth in it. Jane wasn't bitter. She was simply free. She began running fishing tours again this time, not as a necessity for the homestead, but because it brought her joy. Her social media began reflecting this joy. Instead of family portraits, there were serene images of her out at sea, her expression calm, peaceful. You could see it in her face. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. She made space for the friends who had known her before the cameras and welcomed new ones into her world. She began to speak openly about mental health, burnout, and the lessons learned from holding on too long. She never trashed Atz Lee. In fact, she still defended him when necessary. But she no longer carried his burdens. She stopped apologizing for taking care of herself. She never tried to control the narrative. Instead, she let her actions tell the story. The truth was simple. She had loved deeply, given everything she had, and when it was time to let go, she did so with grace. Today, Jane still lives in Alaska, but she does it on her own terms. Her posts are lighthearted, humorous, and full of resilience. She's hinted that she might be ready to date again, though not in a desperate, searching way, just in a life-goes-on kind of way. She interacts freely with her fans, laughs at herself, and offers sincere glimpses into her world. For some people, the end of a marriage feels like the end of their story. For Jane, it was just the end of a chapter. She's not with anyone publicly. And honestly, she doesn't need to be. Happiness no longer depends on another person. As for Atz Lee, he remains on the homestead, continuing the rugged life he's always known off-grid. Close to nature, building and maintaining property, with a quiet, reflective focus, he appears at peace in his solitude. And while there's no verified information about his personal relationships, it seems he's chosen to remain private, continuing the life that perhaps always suited him best. Their children, now young adults, are building lives of their own away from the camera's glare. Piper, now pursuing her Bachelor of Business Administration at Western Washington University, has embraced a quieter life. She's active in her college community, but stays almost entirely off social media. Jane shares the occasional proud mom momenta graduation photo, a fishing trip, but always with respect for Piper's boundaries. It's clear that Jane has passed on her values of strength, independence, and privacy to her daughter. ATN, too, has stepped into adulthood with confidence. Now living in Southern California, he shares occasional Instagram updates, photos of fishing trips, music sessions, or projects that reflect his unique blend of Kilcher, legacy, and personal identity. He once helped his father rebuild a cabin during recovery and has remained connected to both Atz Lee and Jane. That speaks volumes. Their family dynamic may have changed, but the foundation of respect remains. It's a reminder that families don't dissolve with divorce. They adapt. They evolve. Sometimes they deepen in different ways. Jane and Atz Lee's story may have ended as a couple, but they will always be part of the same greater story, a shared history built on survival, grit, and years of love. What Jane has shown the world more than anything is that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's found in silence, in peace, and in choosing yourself when no one else will. Her journey from heartbreak to healing is one of quiet transformation. And in a world full of noise and spectacle, that quiet is powerful. What do you think about Jane's journey? Her strength, her grace in the face of loss? Let us know in the comments below. And if her story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There's so much more to come. Jane's story isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning.